Hi, folks, and welcome back to Film Optimists, where we talk about all things film with a healthy dose of optimism. It's the new year, it's new us, and making things even more new, we have a guest this episode. He's a brilliant writer. You've seen him on Twitch, or you should. His name is Riley Gerberick. He's also, more importantly, our classmate. Riley, how are you?
I'm doing quite well, Seth. How are you guys doing?
Good.
Very,
and
very
thank you for
well.
introducing me because I realized I didn't introduce myself. I am Seth Boyd.
And I am your co-host, Megan. Happy New Year, everybody. And Riley, thank you so much for joining us. We're really excited to have you.
Of course.
Yes.
Thank you for having me on.
Mm-hmm.
And we're having Riley here for a pretty specific reason. We're talking about a movie that is means a lot to me. It is one of my favorite movies in the world. Riley was showing Megan earlier. I have merch for this movie. I have a mug based off a drawing artist did from that
My
scene.
God.
He's
I
holding
also
a mug,
have a
folks.
printout of this still.
Well, that's probably
maybe not.
that's probably like the best scene in the movie. Honestly.
I know, right? Absolutely. Like, it's a movie that is, I think, very profound. I'm not a religious person, but I've had profound experiences with this movie. It is widely considered one of the best movies in world cinema. I think it was Sight and Sound ranked at 29 recently, or maybe it was the British Film Academy out of 50. I think it's definitely one of the most important sci-fis of all time. We were talking about Andrei Tarkovsky's Stalker. So if you haven't seen it, we're about to tell you why. So before we dive in, the reason we're having Riley here is Riley and I and Megan, we all met at St. Mary's College in California.
Yes.
And Riley and I specifically met in a sci-fi class.
That's
so when we had talked about you being in an episode, and I thought, like, this is movies I really want to do. So I think you're the perfect guest. I gave you two choices. Oh, what a choice! But I kind of wanted to hear, between, for folks who know Tarkovsky, probably know what the choice was. It was between this and another sci-fi film he did called Solaris, which are both very unique movies in that they are art house world cinema movies. These are long, slow cinema, deep movies, but they're also sci-fi. They're genre films. They're definitely genre films. So, Riley, between Stalker and Solaris, why did you land on Stalker?
Yeah, so you texted me and you were like, hey, do you want to just hop on the podcast with us? And I was like, yeah, that sounds great. You're like, cool, let's do sci-fi. I'm like, sounds good. I'm like thinking he's probably going to pick like, Blade Runner or something like that. And he's like, here's these 2 3-hour Russian films. Are you cool with that? And I was like, yeah, sure, Seth, let's do it. But I'm glad you did. No, this was super fun.
You met me. You know what you're
doing. Yeah, I should have known. So I was completely ignorant of these films. I hadn't heard of them. I probably heard the name Solaris, but I hadn't heard of Stalker. So when I gave it a quick look, I was just trying to get people's general feel for it. Solaris felt much more like traditional sci-fi. So Stalker seemed a little bit more appealing in that sense. And watching it, it's definitely not like your stereotypical like sci-fi film. It's not like space tech, like digital, anything like that. So that intrigued me a lot. And people generally seem to feel stronger about Stalker than they did Solaris. So it seemed a pretty easy choice. Pick the road less traveled and all that.
And I asked partially because I think the three of us have all dabbled in writing. Megan, you and I've written screenplays, other things. Of the three of us, much like the three in the movie, you would be the writer, though. Riley, you actually have a writer's profile website. You studied creative writing in college. So I was wondering if the fact that one of the main characters is identified only as writer was a factor for you.
Well, I have feelings about that.
Yeah. You would.
As any writer would.
Oh,
right?
Yeah.
Because I think they make. I think that's. We're going to get into in a moment, but writer has things to say. We will have things to say as well.
Oh yeah.
Before we dive into the movie, folks, I just want to give a quick background on who Andrei Tarkovsky is, in case you're not familiar. He was a Russian filmmaker, and Stalker was actually the last movie he made in the Soviet Union in 1979. He was. It's complicated. We won't get into it, but he was essentially exiled after making this movie. He was a radical by Russian standards at the time for the type of movies he was wanting to make that basically just weren't all pro the Soviet Union.
And you can really feel it in this film.
Yeah, you can very much feel it. And if anyone is familiar with Russian film, actually, quick back about we everything we know about editing to the early Russians, the silent filmmaking Russians, especially Einstein. Almost most editing techniques that we still talk to this day were created by Russians in the 1920s and earlier. So, and there's a lot of fast cuts. It's like the most famous scene is like Battleship Potemkin, the Odessa Steps. You know, just the idea of like, oh, we're showing action and we're showing people reacting to it. We're cutting back and forth. A thing we take for granted that we see every day now was invented in Russia in the 20s, you know, and it was very innovative at the time. We still do it all the time. Tarkovsky kind of said, fuck that. I don't want to be known for that. So he was very conscious of what it meant to be known as a Russian filmmaker and wanted to create a very different style. So I think he did that. He unfortunately only made 7 feature films in his lifetime and died at 54 of cancer. And actually, depending on who you ask, there are some theories that he contracted cancer making this movie and the scenes that took place in the chemical plant. His wife also died, and the actor who played Ryder also, all 3 died from the same very strange particular strain of cancer. So
wow,
spooky.
I missed that detail.
Right? Yeah, it's a if you folks did any research about this, a lot is written about how this movie kind of sets up or predicts Chernobyl, even though there's not a direct commentary on that. There's a lot of imagery. There's a lot. It's hard to ignore that, especially as a Western audience. You know, I shouldn't say especially, but like we're not there. We don't see the context of what things looked like pre that. So this movie is out before Chernobyl, and
about 10 years, right?
Yeah, exactly. I think about 10 years, and it wasn't a nuclear reactor, but there was a chemical plant that was maybe making something less savory than they realized when they were shooting. So. But he was a great filmmaker who I think it's hard. I started to put together a list of filmmakers who are still working today who were influenced by him, and honestly, it was too long. Yeah. But if you see a movie that has a beautiful dreamlike sequence that has a great attention to detail, that is philosophical and moves you in a profound way, you can think Andrei Tarkovsky, I would say.
After watching his works, you can definitely, in hindsight, see his influence everywhere.
Right? Yeah. I mean, I think like there's definitely art house folks like Lars von Trier and Terrence Malick, but also like Christopher Nolan's a big fan. You know, Martin Scorsese.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Blockbuster stuff is heavily influenced by him.
I can't believe he only did 7 movies. Like, I didn't know that. And so to have that influence sounds really crazy.
He just doesn't miss.
Yeah.
I mean, he also, I shouldn't say he benefited from this, but you look at folks who made movies their whole lives, and there's there's a lower quality of work as they go on. Even folks like Alfred Hitchcock or someone who made like nearly 50 movies. They're not all great, you know.
I was gonna say his movies might be just so long that there's enough material to fill enough of like
his movies are long, yeah. But yeah, very, very influential with I think a pretty high hit rate. I deeply enjoy all of his movies. So if this one sounds intriguing, I recommend checking him out. And his other movies are not sci-fi, I mean, except for Solaris. So it's just very strange that this kind of pinnacle of art house and of world cinema have to make 2 of the best sci-fi films.
Yeah, definitely.
So Megan, you are not as much of a sci-fi fan.
I was going to say
okay.
yes.
It's a safe space.
I'm coming into this a little bit blind, you guys. I watched it recently for preparation of this episode, and so I'm fully happy to kind of sit back on this one, and I'm excited to hear the masters at work talk about sci-fi seminar style, and I am really excited for it. Like I do have some things to say about this film. Sure. For me, a big win of it was cinematography, and just like I have something to say about the texture of this film, which was like something that really, really stuck out to me.
Beautiful.
It was amazing. I like what you said, Riley. Like, I didn't even think about it, but this is considered like one of the best sci-fis of all time, and yet it's not space age like that kind of style. It's actually the exact opposite. It's very Earth oriented and like Earth nature oriented, which I realized just now, and industrial oriented also, like obviously, but that juxtaposition between like nature and earth and water and all these all
very
of the,
much so, yeah,
was very like elemental to me, and that stood out right away. But that's kind of where I'm coming at it from, basically.
Honestly, when I watched it for my first time through, I was expecting it to be like I was led to believe it was going to be like an environmentalist, like anti-industrial film,
Right.
with just how it was shot, the imagery that was used. And I'm kind of skipping ahead a little bit, but
Sure.
yeah, it doesn't have hardly any of the tropes of your typical like sci-fi movie. You know, a lot of the questions that it asks have nothing to do with like tech or the space race or computers or any of that. It's a very human film.
Yeah, I think we should do a quick synopsis of it before we dive in. Riley, would you like to do that? Or would you like me to?
You can go ahead. I'll be the snarky voice personality.
Perfect. That's why we bring you in here. So,
yeah. Plenty of snark.
The movie takes place in a world that looks pretty similar to 1970s Russia, but also a little bit post-apocalyptic. This is not downtown Moscow. This is some beat down outskirts. Something has happened, and we have text telling us that I don't remember the exact time frame, but last, I think, 10 years or so.
Yeah,
about the last decade or so, a meteorite or something landed nearby this area, and there's no trace of the meteorite, but like something big from space landed, and now there's this area called the zone where laws of physics and other things just don't quite add up. It's dangerous. People have gone missing in there. You can just kind of start walking a straight line, and then you'll end up where you were previously. It's a hostile space that is not well understood, and because of that, it is protected. There's military brigade keeping people from going in there, and among the reasons why this is so interesting is somehow the rumor starts up that in the middle of this zone is the room. If you get to the room, your deepest wish will be fulfilled. And it's not genie rules. You don't just say, I want blank. It is whatever you truly want, which is a very interesting plot point later, because you don't necessarily have much sway over what comes to be. And the Stalker, which I should note, and apologize, I didn't know earlier, is a bad translation. Stalker means more like tracker or like guide.
Yeah.
It's a fortunate mistranslation that we had from 1979 into English that for whatever reason we've kept with.
Yeah, but it feels cool.
It does
like
feel cool.
If the movie was called Tracker, it wouldn't
true.
have that feel to it,
That is true. I think it attracts a particular type of guy our age, Riley, that wants to see the movie called Stalker, which I worry about.
Yeah.
But I'm very glad I met my my partner who was already my wife by the time I saw Stalker, so it wasn't a first date. You should really see this Russian movie called Stalker. Conversation. Don't think that would have gone well, but all that to say,
that's not a green flag.
Yeah,
it's a flag. Right, it's up there with Taxi Driver and First Date Conversations. But so the main character is Stalker, and that is his job, as he is bringing folk into the zone.
Yeah, they pay him to like guide them through the zone to the room, and you've got the two guys, and they don't mention names at all. Like one guy tries to introduce himself, and Stalker stops him and says, call him Ryder. This guy's Professor, and that's all they all they know. That's all they share.
Yeah, this is also a movie where the vast majority of the movie we have 3 characters. I think totally maybe we have 7, including the bartender. But the vast majority of the movie is just 3 characters, which I think you can do a lot with that, and this movie does. All right, premise is established. Riley, what are your impressions? What kind of stood out to you? I know you mentioned some of the environmental stuff, but we'll kind of get towards that's the general plot. We'll talk a little bit more about what happens later, but we're not going to do a scene by scene.
Sure.
Because most scenes are about 10 minutes long.
Oh God, yeah. It's a very impressive film. But I think I was talking to Seth, or I mentioned this when we were texting the other day.
Right.
But this is the type of film where you have to watch it multiple times. It's just the way it is. It's very long and very dense. And I think a lot of people now, like, I've become such a good consumer, I just have to move on from one thing to the next. So it was generally, like, I wouldn't say difficult to watch it the full way through, but I often found myself distracted, and I think that's just the media we're used to now.
Right.
Which is a shame, because, you know, when people talk about good art, you don't look at a painting once and then move on and then never look at it again, right? You don't listen to a song once and go, oh, that was nice, and move on. You'll re-listen to it and you'll get new stuff every time. And I think that if people like give this film and longer films like this, you know, the time to give it a second watch through, you'll get a lot more out of it. You know, I definitely picked up on way more the second time through. Still heavily that like initial environmentalist message that I received, but a lot more details. You get a lot more like in depth with the characters.
And I want to just interrupt and say, I don't think that environmental message is wrong by any means. And something I thought was cool is that Tarkovsky was actually very vocal about responding to theories about this movie.
Yeah.
About all of his movies, and was very open to all theories are valid.
Cool.
But wouldn't just say that and move on, would actually like respond to an interviewer and get into why that theory is valid. And,
Gotcha.
But there's like a theory that at one point, it's a point later in the movie where the three of them kind of just decide to lay down.
Yeah.
There's
so much of that.
There's a lot of
that. Stalker just laying face down in a field and taking a nap, and he's like, you two can hang out.
Right. Actually, we should note, we're going to go back a little bit. The movie begins in sepia tone. And for me, there's a fantastic transition that always sends a shiver when they finally do enter the zone and it switches to color, and it always is unexpected to me, even though I've seen the movie multiple times.
I call it my Wizard of Oz moment.
Right, absolutely.
Yeah. And it's such a sharp contrast, because it comes right after, I think, one of the longest continuously moving shots at the time that was filmed to date, where they're on like a little hand
they're on a trolley.
A little trolley on tracks, and you have this rhythmic, like melodic clacking of the wheels, and everything's in that orange brown sepia tone. It's all industrial. You're in a collapsed, like abandoned section of the city, and from up to there, all you see is like people living in squalor almost. Like Stalker has a very, very minimalist house with just a bed, and the floor is wet, and he has like a stove, and that's it. And his wife and his child's whole house. So you're moving through this whole industrial area, and it's a hard cut from the orange to green everywhere, greens and blues of just deep color, and it's a great scene.
You described it beautifully, and it's like with the hypnotic sound design too. I think this is a movie much like The Birds, where like the distinction between score and sound design is very blurred. But like I frankly do feel like I'm actually in a trance every time I see this scene. You know, it's hypnotic. It's very slow, gradual camera movements, and then it's suddenly you're there. It works every time. It's great.
And you have like the mechanical, just the noises of the train, and the army like shooting at them.
That's true, because this follows maybe the most action heavy sequence of the movie too, where they are actually being shot at and they're trying to avoid the patrol.
Did you guys hear that? I heard a sound too where sometimes it would be like stepping on glass, but it makes this, it literally sounds like a pew pew sound, like from a radar gun or something. That was so, and then
like hitting like a metal coil or something.
Yes, and it was used like multiple times, but I like almost laughed because it sounded too like pew pew, like a literally like a toy gun. But it was, I think that it was in reference to industrialism, mechanics, metallics, but then also it was weird that the glass was making it, like their feet were making it. I think it just was like a purpose to show how empty everything was, but also how littered with things and like industrial things at that.
Absolutely.
That these spaces occupied.
Like everywhere they're going, they're just stepping on like trash. Just the littered ruins of the city. You know?
Even when they are in the zone, which is green, it's still littered. There's overturned cars, there's overturned tanks. There's some of the most beautiful shots in the movie are just the filthy water that are
Oh, there's so much of it.
Right. There's so much
You'll have like a 3-minute scene where it's just slowly panning over like this little lagoon or stream, and you'll see like guns and syringes and other
like a
chemical
religious icon. I think there's, we don't need to dig too deep into the symbolism there right now, but plenty has been written about the items that are being found in there.
Hey folks, this is Megan from Film Optimists. I'm going to try to set up this scene a little bit for us because we had basically expected our Zoom meeting of 3 people to end at 40 minutes, and we were surprised and gifted with an unlimited amount of minutes. So this is us reacting to that. I just wanted to clarify because it may be a little confusing out of context, but here we go.
Okay, looks like we're about to be, did that say been upgraded?
With unlimited minutes.
It said
All
a
right.
gift.
Folks, it's the new year. We're talking about a great movie, and let's just, let's point out for Tarkovsky, because apparently this Zoom meeting we thought was going to have to end and restarted.
That was
Zoom
really
has a
odd.
Tarkovsky fan.
So
Yeah.
one of us went in the room, and that's what we wished for. So,
Oh, yep.
Thank you, Zoom gods. That was weird.
I just want to say there's a prominent dog in this movie.
Yep.
Which is great. You love to see it. The dog doesn't die, folks. That was a stray dog. That was a dog that just after
Really?
they were shooting, they kept the dog. Yeah.
That's fucking perfect.
Right?
Oh my god.
I know.
So that's one of my favorite happy accidents in film history. Just a dog just came up to Stalker while he was lying down. I'm like, cool, keep the dog.
That sounds like perfect for this movie. That sounds like how the whole movie was made almost. Like, just leave it all in. Like,
Yeah.
fuck it.
I heard that a lot of it had to be reshot too.
Yes.
Like the vast majority of it. And the only one of the only original shots that they kept was there's that one shot, it's when they're all laying down and like sleeping,
Right.
and Stalker, I think it's a flashback, or is it implied to be a flashback, but Stalker's like opening his eyes and looking out again, and there's that big bog with the wind that's sweeping over everything.
Right.
That's like the only original shot that they were able to keep in.
Yeah, and if I remember it, part of this was disagreements with the cinematographer and some other financial things that were happening. Like they did change cinematographers, like after shooting nearly half of the whole movie.
Yeah,
and they had to go back and do it again. The behind the scenes of this movie is up there, if like among the most extreme behind the scenes of movie stories.
because if like there's scenes where they're almost entirely submerged in just still water, and if it's in a chemical plant, having to shoot that multiple times must have just been the worst.
Yeah, and the actor, I don't want to fully butcher his name, so give me one moment.
Russian Woody Harrelson.
Oh my god.
That could be that's Stalker. Yeah,
Stalker.
Sorry, he's great, but the guy who is a writer,
Yes,
Antonoli Solensky. Megan, we'll figure this out later. But I'm gonna call him Antonoli for now.
Oh, good luck.
That was Tarkovsky's favorite actor, and like they had worked on every other film prior.
I noticed he was in Solaris as well.
Yeah, he is,
Oh,
and he's great. So he's the one who, along with Tarkovsky and his wife, died. So
wow.
Going with that theory, you can kind of this is complete fan theories, like were they all three film scouting together? They scouting locations or something because they were close, and were they more exposed or
spelunking in chemical plants
exactly.
and all that?
As you do. The dog is a fun. Also bring it to very, very human levels. I think one thing we should talk about is why the two folks are going there, because the writer is pretty open from the beginning about why he's going to the room, right? As he just feels he needs inspiration.
Yeah.
And so on the note of you having things to say about writers,
so I love the characters. I think they're incredibly well written. I fucking hate Ryder. Like the dude is such a so like his introduction, he's the most obnoxious person you've ever met. He's constantly drinking from like a full bottle of what looks like Jaeger. He's got a woman with him who's very high society, and he's like, oh yeah, I'm just gonna, and he speaks in this like scientific, repetitious, like pseudo intellectual style. Absolutely. Where he's like constantly repeating himself. And she's like, do you think the room's real? And he's like, no, it's absolutely not. I know for a fact it's not real. Like gods and magic and like all this stuff, none of it's real. And she's like, what about the Bermuda Triangle? And he's like, well, A prime, B prime, C prime, that's the triangle I believe in and stuff. And it's just like shut up. But he's got such great lines, like later on when they're on the precipice of the room,
right?
And he's talking and he's like, why do I write? Like they're all like, this is the climax of the film, so everyone's emotions are high and everyone gets their soapbox. And he's like, I write because I have a compulsion, like I have to prove myself to others, like that's why I write, that's why any writer writes. And it's like, oh shit, thanks, okay. God, all right. Yeah, like a feeling of like inadequacy or emptiness. Because at one point he says, he and the professor are talking and he's like, oh, I write about my readers, like what else is there to write about? And just having such a hollow, aspect to him.
Yeah,
you really get the sense that he is a man who has lost himself.
Right.
Yeah.
He just is struggling and longing just to be known. Like he just wants to live forever, and that's why he writes, because he's like, what's the point in writing if no one's going to read my stuff 100 years from now?
Yeah, no, it's very interesting because when you have three characters, one is a religious figure, which we'll get into a second with Stalker. The other one is just called Professor, who's a great character as well. And you have writer Tarkovsky, being such an auteur director, you would think would be, feeling related to the creative of the group. And no, I think you're right that he is very obnoxious and brutish at many a time, but also I think at the end of the day is still engaging,
incredibly. Yeah.
One of those scenes where the three of them have just laid down, or they're about to lay down, and he is just kind of berating Professor over I don't remember what, and after a long tirade, Professor's just like, Jesus, is that all you think about? And I just love that line. Like, is this really all you spend your time doing?
Yeah, and I think he's just talking nonsense. I can't remember exactly what he's talking about either, but I remember watching it the second time and being like, oh, he's not talking about anything in specific. He's just talking to hear himself talk. And I think that goes back to the like, I'm writing about my readers. I'm writing about.
He doesn't have to have anything to say.
No.
Yeah.
And
which I think is like the worst. I think there was like Kurt Vonnegut quote, I'm about to butcher, that's like, who is to be more pitied, the writer who is in a totalitarian group and can't say anything, or the writer who isn't and has nothing to say? And this writer doesn't, and we should kind of catch up plot wise, is they are in the premises of the room, and for multiple reasons nobody goes in. And part of it is we get a little bit more of the detail. We get more background onto how the rules work. And there's a character who's been mentioned a few times called Porcupine. And this is one of the more kind of creepy plot points to me, is Porcupine is leading people in there all the time. He's been doing this for years, and finally goes in the room himself one day. And I think you find it pretty early in the movie. He goes in the room, he gets rich, then days later, maybe a week later, he hangs himself.
Right.
And we find out later in the movie, he went in because his brother died, and he thought I would go in there and bring my brother back to life, and he doesn't.
Right.
And I really love this. This is a really great dark example of how the rules work. Is as much as he thought he was going to save his brother, that's not what he really wanted. What he really wanted was money.
Yeah, and that's, we're kind of getting to like the heart of the message of the film, and I think Ryder is the one who like puts two and two together and all this. And he says like, he didn't go in there asking for money. He went in there asking to get his brother back, but what all men want at the end of the day is just
Mhm.
money, you know,
Right.
and your greed is what gets the better of you, and that is what the room granted him, and it is the guilt that caused him to kill himself. You know, he didn't kill himself because he lost his brother. He killed himself because he wanted money more than his brother. And like Porcupine was guiding his brother to the room, but his brother died, and then he's like, well, I'll go in. Professor has like a really, he's not even an opposite role to Ryder. They all operate in this very lovely little triad that they got going on.
Mm-hmm.
Professor he says he's just a scientist, right? A physicist. And on their way to the room, there's this very odd like ritual where Stalker has like 3 nuts tied to bandages, right? And he just kind of lobs them.
When
and
we
then
say nuts,
sends,
we mean metal nuts, by the way, folks.
Yeah. Like, you know, with the whole industrial imagery, like he'll just toss it and then send Professor out after it, and then Ryder, and then himself. He says it's like just to keep people on the path.
Yeah.
And for the life of me, honestly, I didn't get the feeling that there was a path.
I think he mentions like the path kind of moves, right? Because like you can go one route the first time and then you come back there next time, you can't take the same route.
Yeah. And you're given all this information about the zone and how like the laws work and the laws are changing, and that there is this almost intent and intelligence to the zone. And I think the characters like wholeheartedly believe that, but as a viewer, I didn't get the impression that there was.
So there's 2 important moments we should mention that are important before the theory I'm about to spout. One is when they get through the zone, there's a point after they've already gone through this rigmarole, after Stalker's been tossing his let's just call it what it is, nutsack. And it's kind of, and it's especially annoying to Ryder, who's saying like, what are you doing? Can't we just walk straight? It's like, now we're trying to see if there's traps. And he's always mentioned there's traps, and they never seem to be in direct danger. But at one point they're directly in front of the building that the room is in, and Ryder's getting pissed off saying, why can't we just walk straight? And Stalker's kind of looking all around trying to figure out where to go, and explain you can't just go straight, it's not going to work. Ryder says, fuck this, walks straight, and then suddenly hears a voice saying stop. And Stalker looks to Professor, says, why did you stop him? Professor says, I thought it was you. Ryder comes back and says, which one of you guys said this? It is not clarified who it is. There's another moment later where Professor leaves something behind. He leaves his thermos. We'll find out why in a bit. And Stalker keeps telling him, like, you really can't turn around. Like you can't do it.
Yeah, no one gets back on the path. Once you've left the path, like you're lost forever.
And lo and behold, they lose track of him. He's gone back, and they're like, all right, Ryder and Stalker, they're going to plow through, they're going to get through it. They're going to have to find Professor later. And they ended up right back where Professor was when he went back for his stuff. And Stalker seems very confused, so it must have been a trap. And I think this is the moment where they say, like, let's just lay down for a minute.
Yeah, and I think that's also the moment where Ryder begins to, maybe not begins, but solidifies his belief of like, oh, these rules are fucking made up.
Yes, which I was going to say, like, this is a theory about the movie that Tarkovsky has said is valid, is that Stalker is fucking with them, and that this is all just show. This is just he's just pretending to, lead them through all this shit, and none of it's real.
Or even it may maybe not even be like an intent to like deceive them on Stalker's part.
Right.
He may wholeheartedly believe that there are these rules to the zone. Like you have to find your like way each time by just on intuition and throwing the bandages and then following them willy-nilly.
Right.
But yeah, that scene where there's Ryder's just walking towards the room, right? And he's stopped by the voice. It's very unclear if the voice was a real thing, whether they all heard it or not. Like if they said, why
even the dialogue isn't like because the dialogue is, why did you stop him? It's not acknowledging that there was,
or like,
voice.
Were you the one that stopped him?
Right.
And it's like, I think if you heard a voice or you would know, oh, that guy is the one that said it, right? So either it's, or maybe they didn't even hear the voice. It's very unclear. The dialogue does not directly address, why did you say this? It's, why did you stop him, or why did he stop, kind of thing. And it could have just been a writer, like when you're told, like, hey, this place is dangerous, and you're like, oh, I'm bold, I'm gonna go do it. For a man as full of self-doubt as Ryder, I would not have been surprised if he's approaching this thing and there's the doubt in his mind that's like, okay, this actually might be dangerous. And if you're out in the middle of the wilderness, you might hear things because your anxiety's high, your nerves are high,
and you've been shot at earlier that day.
You've been shot at, and there's a strange man taking naps in swamps, and he's supposed to lead you to this mythical room.
It's a very, I think it's very open. What did you think, Megan? Did you think that was like supposed to indicate one way or the other?
Well, Riley just reminded me that like it's also could be a thing about blindly following faith, because then also if we get this image of Stalker as the Christ figure with a literal like crown of thorns, like that's a really interesting way to think about it too. Is like they put their faith into this guy in this like in a journey, in like a travel journey towards what could be seen as like an epiphany and the end all be all like heavenly realm sort of thing, and getting what you want. But you do have to submit yourself to that and like put your faith into a figure in order to do that. And the figure here is like Stalker, which is I hadn't even like picked that up. That's really interesting.
The room is like often portrayed as like salvation, right? Stalker says like only the completely unhappy are like allowed in and survive and given what they want.
And I think a professor refers to it as a vocation rather than a job. And Stalker does take his job very seriously.
Right.
I think before we get into, we definitely need to address a little bit more about Stalker as a religious figure, but we should talk about professors. What's going on with him first? Because this ties in religion is a big thing. And I should back up and say, Tarkovsky, I think there's actually conflicting accounts as to what his religious affiliation was. Obviously growing up in Soviet and working in Soviet Russia, he was supposed to be an atheist. He made movies that had a lot of Christian imagery, especially Andrei Rubel, a movie about a Russian monk who was an icon painter that was buried by Russia for years before it was released. That was the most conflict I think he had until this. But most folks think he was agnostic, most biographers I should say, and folks who knew him, but also he was deeply aware of religion. He was he was studied it. He was fascinated by it. I think that comes out really clear in this movie. So a professor who is much more reasonable and quiet than Ryder.
Yeah, what's interesting is Professor is, and you don't really learn that much about him until like the very end, but he is the one who's concerned with people, right?
Right.
He's the one who has the grappling with the morality of man and all of this stuff, or Ryder's the like very material, the world is just as it is, and I wouldn't say that the professor is a theosophic figure, but when you get to the end of the film, you find out what that thermos he went back for was, right? And they're all standing there. Their stalkers told them about Porcupine. He told them about the rules of the room, and he's like, you just have to go in and surrender yourself to it, right? You just have to go in and believe, and everything that you get will, or everything that you want will be granted to you. I knew I chose you guys well, like you're good men. They've had some problems up to this point, but they're there, right? He just wants them to go in and get it over with, kind of thing. And Ryder says, I don't want to go in, right? I think hearing about Porcupine he has that moment of doubt again, right? He's like, well, maybe this is a magical granting room, and the fears in the back of my mind will bring out something horrible. He makes some comment about like, if I thought about my life, I wouldn't be a kinder person.
Yeah, that's because right before he's session, he goes on like, you should think about your past. You should think about your younger days. He's like, that's not going to work for me.
Right.
I relate to. Think about my childhood does not make me a kinder person.
Right. And then you hear Professor, he's like, okay, Professor, you go in. And Professor's fiddling with something. And they're like, what do you have? He's like, a bomb. And they're like, oh, haha. He's like, no, it's a 20 kiloton bomb.
Right.
Yeah. And he had made a phone call right before the scene. So there, we keep cutting back and forth.
Yeah, that's fine. This is
there's just so much going. So they
it's a long movie with very long scenes that it seems like nothing happens, but then you try to describe this movie.
It's all interconnected. Yeah, seriously.
Yeah.
So right before they get to the like antechamber to the room,
Right.
there's a small little like bedroom looking like sort of thing, and they're sitting in there, and a phone rings out in the middle of this like completely overgrown, abandoned
And here's the thing, like
warehouse.
my reaction to this is like, this is funny. This is unexpected.
Yeah.
There's a moment where they all just kind of stop and look at it, and
it's a very comedic scene because Ryder answers it and he's like, hello? No, this isn't the whatever, and hangs up.
That's right.
Yeah.
And they're all looking at it, and the professor makes a phone call to somebody, and he's like, put me through to laboratory 4 or something like that, I think. And someone answers the phone, and he's like, I found it in warehouse B. You tried to hide it from me, but I've got it. And there's this tense scene where he and the other person are talking. The other person's like threatening him with jail. He's like, your career will be ruined. Like, we'll come after you. And he's like, you can't stop me. Like, I've got everything now. And he hangs up. And then flash forward to when he's got the bomb. He explains that like, we heard of people coming out here and people going missing and all these people getting hurt, and me and some colleagues decided, what if we destroyed it? Like, what if we just got rid of it? What if this room fell into the hands of evil men? What would we do then?
Yeah.
So it's best to just get rid of it entirely and end this all, and that way no one, because if a million people come flocking to this room, you'd have czars and emperors and whatever like emerging from it. So he has a very obviously negative view of the world and of people and of humanity. And there's a fight over the bomb. And they're struggling. Stalker's trying to get it from him because it's like, this is all I have. Like, I'm trying to help people. Yeah. And Ryder shoves him off and says, this is nothing. Like, you're greedy. You let us here. Because throughout the thing, Ryder's getting upset that Stalker's sending him ahead to all the dangers. Right? He's like, you send me through what you called the meat grinder.
Right. Ryder and him are especially at odds.
You gave me 2 long straws when we were drawing straws to see who would go first. Like, you think I'm a fool? Like, I was gonna die this whole time. And so he's very resigned. He's like, fine, like, let him blow it up. This place it's nothing. And then Stalker has his big long like monologue that I think we can all talk about. He's very, very man, I don't even know how to describe it. He says, this is all I have, and he visibly means it. The acting is phenomenal.
Yeah,
it's great. And I think I'm glad you mentioned that the acting is very great in this movie.
His vocal quality changes so much.
I don't think anyone's ever looked more pathetic on film.
Yeah.
And I don't mean that as like, oh, this shitty actor. Like, no, he truly looks like he's
so sad. He says like, I have nothing to give my wife. I'm a horrible person. I'm a louse. I have nothing. There is no joy in my life. I'm going to leave my wife and child, my crippled child, nothing. Yeah. But all I have is to bring people here and to give them what happiness they can get. And that's fine. Don't take this from me.
Yeah. And it's hard for me to not think about his parallels in the real world of this character, like obviously like a religious figure, like a pastor, a priest, but also frankly like an AA coach, like that's kind of what I was thinking too, like someone who is not really being paid for this. I mean, he's being paid, but it's not like it's making ends meet, we saw their house at the beginning of the movie.
Yeah.
The first dialogue is his wife being really upset about, you're really going to do that again.
Yeah. She's like, your daughter has barely gotten used to you, and she's 8. looks like, not
And-
a young child.
And it's theorized by characters in the film that his daughter is crippled and maybe also
Cursed.
cursed.
Oh.
We'll get into that later, because he got into the zone.
Yeah, and something in the zone like came back with him, kind of thing.
Mm.
And yeah, we'll get into theories, because it's so
There's a
open-ended
lot.
and so
Yeah.
fun.
But
Professor's getting ready to blow it up, and then they all have their moments, and I think that's when Ryder says like, they're each like arguing, trying to like give their own definition to the room and say, no, this is what it is, this is what it is.
Right.
And I can't remember who suggests it, but someone suggests like maybe there's nothing there.
Yeah.
You know,
I think it's Ryder. Probably.
I think so
Yeah.
too, but like there's nothing here. He just referring to Porcupine, like Porcupine just got money and then thought he got it for his brother, like instead of his brother, and killed himself, you know.
Right.
Maybe
This was overwhelmed with the guilt, and
Right.
I think it does a really appropriate job of this isn't evangelical atheism, you know, this is not that, but it does make a great argument. Like it's really hard to ignore the imagery of the scientist is blowing up the god.
Yeah.
You know.
Yeah.
And he has a point. You know, he's not wrong.
Yeah.
Well, I was gonna say we needed these three characters in particular, and their particular like stances and like what they're for.
Absolutely.
It's very much like a trinity there, to use more biblical
Yes.
imagery, you know.
Yeah.
But it is like and I think that's pretty intentional, is to have the materialist, have the guy who has nothing and who's saying I'm desperate, like give me something, and then have the guy who's like the scientist figure to come in and say, you know, maybe this is all for naught. Yeah, maybe both of you are incorrect, and like let me help you out to put my authority to it, kind of thing. Which
And Seth, if you're correct in that Tarkovsky was like agnostic, this is the most agnostic you can get.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Like you have the diehard believer, the firm non-believer, and then the one who just doesn't care, right?
Yeah.
And then it's a very interesting like ending, right? Because no one has like really made a thorough argument for or against blowing up the room or not blowing up the room.
Right.
But there's just that moment of doubt, right?
Right.
There's just that moment of doubt when the whole film is based off of faith and belief and like conviction. And it's just a brief moment of doubt that stops Professor. He's like, maybe it is nothing.
Yeah.
You know, maybe this room does have no power.
And I think we should also address the subtext in this language too, because I think there's still a fear of it, you know. And one thing Tarkovsky was actually again on the note of him responding to theories, he's like, as far as he was concerned, the reason Ryder didn't go in the room is that Ryder still believes in the room, but Ryder realizes if I go in there and I write a bestseller, I wasn't talented.
Right.
And that's great, and that's a really good idea. You know, it's like, no, I fucking suck, and I'm gonna kill myself because I never had the talent, because I wrote a bestseller after going in there.
It just came from this magical box,
right? And it's like, and I don't want to be a bestseller. I want to be a good writer. You know,
I want to be remembered for 100 years.
I think we can all three relate to that. You know,
God,
and so it's like when Professor dismantles the bomb, as he does, and says it's nothing, maybe he's actually realizing this shitty version of hope is actually worth something. At least it is to Stalker.
Yeah.
You know, and going back to, you know, I think I've said we'll talk about it later. We've also talked about so much about what a religious figure he is. We should maybe put a bow on it, but like he is absolutely this. I don't know if he's necessarily a Christ-like figure, but he's really this apostle at the least. You know, he's really,
he's prophetic.
He's very prophetic. He's some of my favorite moments of this movie are him just reciting poetry, and the poetry is actually written by Tarkovsky's father.
Oh wow!
Yeah, most of it at least, and it's really beautiful, and it's, you know, gorgeous imagery, as we've already discussed over.
It's solemn as fuck. It's so
right.
sad.
Oh,
It's so sad.
I mean, like, what's the poem is called? It's still not enough.
Oh,
Yeah,
no.
yeah.
And it's great. And
Every frame to me looks like a sad art student's photography project.
Oh,
But
yeah,
it's so
yeah.
well like composed,
yeah,
but even still, like
Yeah.
melancholy in every scene.
Very,
yeah.
very.
There's a profound sense of melancholy in it, which this is perverse to say, but this is a happy movie for me. This is a movie, if I'm home alone, I'm going to rewatch.
Yeah.
I'm going to make Exhibit A martini and have the dog in my lap and watch this movie, which is what I did recently, you know, prep for this. So it's a comforting, but also very solemn movie.
There's a lot of these would-be theses, right?
Right.
You know, there's a moment where Stalker's talking monologue to the audience. He's not speaking.
Right.
But he's talking about how life is to be soft and
Right.
pliable like a tree, and hardness and strength are death's companions. You know,
Yeah.
the essence of death is to be hard and brittle and strong,
Right.
and to be the most alive is to be soft and made able to change and things like this. And it's so natural, this film. The imagery is so striking. You have that scene when they're leading up to the room of the two corpses in the plant, with the plant growing up in between them,
Right.
you know, contrasting. And it's like a sapling, right? It's like a vine, contrasting the hardness of the cold stone and corpses with the like new life.
Yeah, I think it's a really beautiful movie, and I think it says a lot of interesting things about Christ, about so many things. But on our religion, I think it does oddly end with this note about, I think if we take at face value, as we've already discussed, you know, the imagery here, the symbolism, it kind of still has this message of like, this religion, which we can call the rumor religion, is dangerous, but it can still provide hope, and maybe that's worth it. You know, I think, as you noted, like such an agnostic viewpoint, and I think that's true. Like I was raised Baptist. I have am no longer practicing a religion. I don't try to convert people to atheism. You know what I mean? I don't think there's a goal. I think there's a thing to be achieved in that. And I frankly miss having a viewpoint where I could rely on. You know, I miss having faith in something that I could chalk things up to.
Absolutely.
I really do miss that. I think Tarkovsky probably feels some of that to some degree, and I feel that in this movie of like, it'd be great to just say it's in God's hands, or it's in the room's hands, or whatever version.
That's what the ending says to me, of that they're so flippant and just like kind of like, meh, we all don't go to the room then. I think it's kind of really indicative of probably the feelings of religion at the time too, for if it's a Soviet movie at the time, but for a lot of people, you know, if you come into terms with systems that are in place before you, and then you're kind of coming into your own life and you're like, well, I can walk through it anyway. Like it's almost like I don't need to be exposed to this salvation apparently yet at this time.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's what makes the film so human. You know, it's about faith. It doesn't need to be a religious faith. It can be, I think you said it well, Megan, like a faith in like any systems at the time, you know. And I think you can definitely feel that sense of like possibly Tarkovsky's feelings towards the Soviet Union at the time, you know, like I am fed up and done with this. You know, I have my own reasons for leaving, but there are plenty of people, even still today, that are like, the Soviet Union was good for many, many reasons.
Right.
And Seth, I'm very much in the same boat. You know, I was raised Catholic, and now I'm agnostic. You know, I stopped practicing probably like a decade ago at this point.
Right.
But yeah, it's a beautiful, beautiful film on faith, truth, belief, however you want to connect all those things together.
Hi, folks. You've been listening to Film Optimists. We certainly hope you enjoyed this episode. And if you wanted to continue as much as me and Seth did, this is actually just part 1 of our 2-parter episode with Riley. We just couldn't get enough of him, obviously. So stay tuned for part 2 coming up to you in our next upload. Thanks so much and stay optimistic.